So, let me introduce the panelists to you. Let's start at the end there with Wim Kuijken, a Delta Commissioner and Chair of the Supervisory Board of DNB, which is the Central Bank of the Netherlands. You've got a very interesting combination of the Delta work and the bank. Then we have Paula Caballero. Paula is a World Bank Senior Director for Natural Resources, so that's more of our financial side. Then we have, now you say your name for me, I'm so bad with Dutch names, I'm going to get it wrong, Sijbesma.
Pretty good.
I'm sure he's lying. Chief Executive of Royal DSM, a multinational specializing in health and nutrition and a whole range of other things. Then we have Laurent Sédogo. Laurent is from the West African Science Service Center on Climate Change and Adapted Land Use. You come to us as both a practitioner and having had experience in government. Then we have Marjeta Jager. Marjeta is Deputy Director-General of the Directorate-General for International Cooperation and Development of the European Commission. Then we have Robert Glasser, Special Representative of the Secretary-General for Disaster Reduction. Yes. And finally, but not least, of course, Naoko Ishii, who's Chief Executive of the Global Environment Facility, but you also have experience of government, having previously been Deputy Financial Minister in Japan. So, a wide range of skills and, if I may say so, without flattery, talents. So I'm expecting lots of very good comment here. Let me come to you, Wim, first of all, for your reflections on what Queen Maxima said.
First of all, I think that the combination, as Queen Maxima stressed on, between policies, concrete measures, and financial services is key. It's key in the approach of adaptation and climate change. And that sounds so simple, but it's so hard to reach. In the Netherlands, this is a low-lying country. And water is, in the Netherlands, dominant in our adaptation strategy. And in 2010, this country decided to try to avoid a next disaster we had in the past, of course, several. That is new. So since 2010, we are finding out and making experience with this new approach, with legislation, a yearly program, a commissioner, funding, and decisions, norms and standards you have to take before you start to work. It's a long-term program, ending up never. And it's central that local communities in such a program are connected to the national and maybe the international strategic level. That you reach the long-term scenarios with uncertainty, with the short-term measures to take. Actually, it's a business case, because it's 7 times more expensive to clean up the mess than to invest into prevention. So that is my reaction to this
Paula.
Wonderful speech.
Well, I really want to thank Queen Maxima for framing the issue so well. Without a question, financial inclusion is definitely a part of the toolkit, including at the World Bank. But you mentioned the fact that there's many that are still outside of the financial system, and there's many that are not sufficiently embedded in the opportunities that therein lie. And these are the most marginalized and vulnerable people around the world. And for them, natural resources are determinants of poverty. So from where I sit as the Global Director for Environment and Natural Resources at the bank, we really look at the safeguarding and the sensible, robust management of natural resources as a key element, not only to lifting people out of poverty, but to keeping people out of poverty. It's about pathways, it's about livelihoods, it's about also very gender-sensitive strategies. So just a few numbers, about 20% of the world's population depend and benefit directly or indirectly from forest resources. That's 1.3 billion people, and many of those are forest-dependent indigenous peoples, and particularly the smallholders, not just the farmers, but also the fishermen, that are critical for being kept out of poverty. Secondly, we estimate at the bank that about 9% of the world's rural population, of the world's poorest, are kept out of extreme poverty. They are poor, but they're lifted out of extreme poverty through the additional revenue streams and opportunities from forest resources. Globally, fisheries represent about almost 20%, and that's the average, and in some countries up to 60% of animal protein, again for the world's poorest. So without a question, we need to look at complementary measures, but natural resources are a key part of the adaptation response. And that means both community-based approaches that enable communities to understand what are their local impacts and how they can assess them and manage them and plan for them, and ecosystem-based approaches that recognize the value of ecosystems and the value of natural infrastructure. So these are all complementary measures, part of a collective toolbox.
Sijbesma.
Yeah. Well, appreciate to be here in presence of Queen Maxima, and appreciate the organizers, but...
There's always a but.
Well, I cannot easily talk. I'm sitting here, and I seriously mean that, with mixed feelings, and I cannot easily talk in a conference on climate adaptation without addressing climate mitigation. It would be our moral responsibility, maybe societal responsibility, and maybe economic sense, to take care that most of the adaptation measures are not necessary. It would even be immoral, and I'm sitting here on the borderline of business, it would be even immoral if the adaptation goes at the expense of mitigation and put the financial burden to the most vulnerable or future generation. It would be immoral if our collective failure of mitigating climate change becomes a business driver for successful businesses in the future to provide solutions to the most vulnerable people. On the other hand, I admit it would also be immoral to have a blind eye of the inevitable effects of climate change and the needs of the most vulnerable people, and to address it. And therefore, I think in the meantime, we can talk about the climate crisis instead of climate change if we're already addressing adaptation. I am, together with Queen Maxima, very pleased by the progress we made in Paris, and I think we are at the tipping point and the world will change. Well, there are two types of adaptation then. Adaptation to overcome the problems climate change will still cause, but also adaptation for businesses and others due to the mitigating actions. There will come a price on carbon. I'm co-chairing together with Céline Royal the World Bank initiative on carbon pricing. There will come a price on carbon. The world will change. Those companies who will not prepare for a future change will become the new losers, will have their own Kodak moment, as I call it, and I would advise you not to have that. And to prepare yourself and make your business future-proof, that is what we are trying to do. How? Reduce, enable, advocate. We reduce our own greenhouse gas emission, we use renewable energy, we prepare on a price on carbon. Enable, develop solutions, products to provide sustainability in food, in alternative energy to our customers, and advocate is basically what I do here. And we have all kinds of solutions which we can add to the world to address the adaptation for the most vulnerable as good as possible. Coming back on the point of Queen Maxima, but we need a financial model that we can not only solve the problems in Rotterdam if water will rise, but already today, the south of Bangladesh, the Horn of Africa, those areas who are today already confronted with the problems of climate change, and you cannot accuse them that they caused it, but they don't have the means to address it right now.
So there's a, well said, and there's a conflict I can see in business between the business model in which profit it has to be part of the equation and doing what actually is a humanitarian thing. Laurent, Sédogo.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Although I agree with my neighbor that mitigation is very important, but since from the business side, from the policy side, working with people, adaptation for us, of course, is mandatory. Queen Maxima said that the poorest are those who are suffering more about climate change. This is the real situation in whole Africa. When you look at the figures with very high population growth rate, with high poverty rate and so on, today, for the farmers, adaptation is just a matter of survival. How do we address the issue of agricultural production in the context of a changing environment, where we have higher temperature, meaning that the previous crops that our traditional crops are no more valid, with extreme events who are destroying all infrastructure, with even disease which are now just popping up, malaria, and we are even wondering if the outbreak of Ebola is not a consequence. Scientists start investigating in it. So for us, it's a matter of survival. Then we need responses, not tomorrow, but today. And this is why we were very pleased when Germany came with this, the Federal Republic of Germany came with this initiative of creating regional climate service centers in West Africa, one in West Africa, one in Southern Africa. In West Africa, this is the West African Climate Service Center on climate change, on adaptation, adapted land use, to provide the scientific evidence about how climate is changing, what is impact on the ecological and human systems, and how can we take it and bring it to the policymakers, to the decision makers, farmers, to tell them, in this context, this is now how you need to behave. This is exactly what we need to address. It's a matter of survival. It's a matter, because the burden of the whole development agenda has become heavier for all West Africa. How do we feed 2 billion of people by 2050 under this changing environment? This we need to find the scientific evidence and bring it to the policymakers, to the farmers, to businessmen, and to tell them, in this situation, this is how we need to behave, and this is the whole objective of these regional climate service centers.
And we've discussed already in this conference the importance of actually bringing the finance ministries together with the environment ministries, that we need to have the two speaking together to get a really comprehensive solution. Marjeta, your thoughts?
First of all, I would like to thank you, Queen Maxima, for inspiring speech. It's a pleasure and honor to be here on behalf of the European Commission. And as you all know, I'm immensely proud that Europe is the biggest provider of climate finance worldwide. It's around 14.5 billion in 2014. And as you are all aware, the EU collective order is around 68 billion for 2015. But here it comes my pledge, as Queen Maxima said, our resources are not enough. We need the private sector to help. We are counting on private sector. We need more blending. We need the financial institutions to basically share the burden, because we have a shared responsibility. And we, as European Union, we are fully committed to spend 20% of our budget from 2014-2020 for climate-related issues. And basically, we are counting that the SDGs and Addis conclusions, as Queen also mentioned, will be fully fulfilled. I would also like to mention our flagship program. This is Global Climate Change Alliance. It started in 2007 with 4 countries. Now we have done more than 55 adaptation in 41 countries, and the budget is around 350 million now for the GCCA Plus that will start now in 2016. I would also like to mention that there needs to be a right balance between mitigation and adaptation. and the support to mitigation efforts is the other side of the coin. So adaptation efforts today are bound to fail if we do not reduce also the emission worldwide and globally. And my last thought would go that the development and climate change are interlinked. There is a clear linkage, and it was confirmed by SDGs and 2030 post-agenda, and I would like to say that also other projects like we have, like Electrify, Agrify, and all other projects of the European Union can clearly contribute to the reduction of the carbon emissions, and we can jointly build the better future for the poorest countries as well. We can only do that working hand in hand, and I'm counting, as I said, on private sector for blending and more investments in that. And thank you, Queen Maxima.
Thank you so much. Robert, disaster reduction is your particular area, so what were your thoughts?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Queen Maxima, for that very wonderful introduction to the topic. I guess a few reactions. One, I'm sympathetic to the idea of, not letting our efforts to adapt interfere with our efforts to mitigate, because without mitigation, adaptation ultimately, maybe not in the next 5 years, is impossible. On the other hand, even if all greenhouse gases stopped right now everywhere around the world, because of the inertia in the climate system, we would continue to warm. And we are already, everywhere we go, seeing evidence, even though you can't associate any one event necessarily scientifically with climate change, when you see the same patterns emerging everywhere, and particularly in developing countries, we need immediate action. I think the Queen's comment about equitable growth is very important, and excluded communities, because fundamentally vulnerability is fundamentally linked to poverty. And that idea of course, we only reduce poverty, history has shown, through economic growth, but you can have economic growth without poverty reduction if that growth isn't equitable. And I'd like to highlight two constraints to economic growth to respond to some of the Queen's comments. The first is denial of rights, and the second is market failures. With respect to denial of rights, what we've seen is fundamentally poverty is linked to denial of rights. We see poor communities are especially vulnerable. They don't have access in government to express their needs and desires. Resources from government don't reach communities. They're excluded from the process. In disasters, we see so much evidence of this that it's impossible to ignore. There are communities where in storm surges, tsunamis, where there are no women left alive in the village, because the women, for cultural reasons, issues of gender, either are wearing clothes so they can't swim, or they're not taught to swim because it's not their role to swim. So you see these tragic examples of where cultural norms and issues of power dynamics are fundamental in vulnerability in disasters. The second point I wanted to make, which I think the Queen actually highlighted quite well, was the issue of market failures. Because there's an assumption, first of all, I think the only way we are going to respond to climate change is by mobilizing the market. We have to make changes so quickly that unless it's driven by market forces, it's not going to happen fast enough. A carbon tax is an element of that, but also the sense that there are opportunities to reach poor communities that the business community isn't even aware of. For example, through insurance products, micro-insurance products, where it's clearly making impact.
So we can't just think of all people as uninsurable.
Exactly, and similarly, social businesses are designing products that can reach poor communities as a profit-making opportunity, as well as an opportunity for the poor.
Naoko.
First of all, thank you so much, Queen Maxima, for your very inspiring speech, and also reminder to all of us that how important this agenda is. In fact, 2015 is a great year with an adoption of the SDG, that you were there, as well as COP21, which actually put this importance of natural capital Paula mentioned that the natural resources, the importance of natural capital to the center stage of the policy discussion. And in fact, that it is the poorest and the most vulnerable who are become a victim of this degradation of natural capital, very much exacerbated by climate change. So what the GEF has been doing is actually to try to work with those and the guardian of that natural capital, be it the smallholders in the farming village, or that the coastal community of the fishermen, and so those kind of smallholders, community people, and how to augment their capacity to manage and cope with, and their ability to cope with the natural capital. Maybe that then give you that then 3 quick examples that then based on our own work. First one is actually that we are working on the food security issue in Africa. That Laurent already mentioned that how important and how critical that the food security issue in Africa. We are working with the smallholders in the several villages and the community in Africa, and try to understand what is the best practice for the farming or adjusting the cropping time, or that drought and resilient seas, and mostly actually working with the local institution to identify the best of the best practice. So it's basically how to help the smallholders to manage their natural resources at their hand, be it the soil and the water and the forest. So that's one thing. The second quick example is actually we are working with also the fisheries community to help them manage their natural resources, be it coral reef, or how to introduce the more sustainable fishery practice, and also link up to the market. So this is a second example. Paula also mentioned it. The third example is very much inspired by Queen Maxima. This is the importance of the financial inclusion. We are working with several local institutions to how to help or build up more microfinance, which should be available more and more smallholders or the farmers or the fishery community, but also to introduce the risk weather-based, weather index-based insurance. So these are kind of new areas that we have been working, and then it's so important to make sure nobody left behind and those poorest community have a good access to this financial service. So these are 3 examples, but fundamentally to help the smallholders, farmers, the fishery community to augment their own capacity of manage the natural capital, and actually let them also organize themselves to also reach out actually policymakers, which will be the maybe next round of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to sort of drill down now a bit more to what constitutes a good enabling environment for adaptation. I mean, what policies or information do people need in order to incorporate and plan for adaptation? Let's start with you, Marjeta.
Thank you very much. Yes, I will try to give you a few examples. According to our best knowledge, we should start with the establishment of a solid national climate action strategy. Then we need to basically mainstream the climate change into the poverty reduction. That would be really an absolute must. Also, we need to build the ownership. Basically, the climate change needs to be integral part of the national development strategy. As I said, there is a strong linkage between development and climate change. Plus, what we need to do absolutely is basically strengthen the capacity of all levels of administration in the partner countries, meaning from local, regional, country level. Basically, we need to also address the issue of adaptation plan, and we need to work more on the monitoring, evaluation, reporting. And what we also need to do is establish a participation process, constant dialogue. Basically, we need to involve all the stakeholders, again, to get better ownership of the process. And of course, access to the fundings that we have mentioned already before, it's crucial. We have seen now, as Queen Maxima mentioned before, El Nino, that also international community can do much better once we work together. For example, we have merged the humanitarian and development aid in case of El Nino, because we merged our resources in 100 million contribution to Ethiopia, for example. And there, what we have done is we have done the joint global assessment of the needs, and that has been proven as extremely important joint action with the UN, with the World Food Programme, etc., etc. And then we can basically address also the root causes and then adaptations through the mitigation into the global strategy, and through the dialogue we can contribute with the countries, you know, to be better prepared, not only for the disasters, but also for the mitigation in the future. Thank you very much.
Paula, I'm thinking about good enabling environment, and I'm thinking actually on very practical terms, a good enabling environment, access to mobile phone, to a constant signal that doesn't fall down when there are disasters, because we've seen how mobile phones and good telecoms unite the world and enable access to microfinance, for instance. So, what are your thoughts about enabling environments?
Look, enabling environments are critical both for the short and the long term. So one of the important things about adaptation is that we need to respond to the immediate impacts, and I think that everybody who works in disaster risk management is seeing the trends and seeing the severity of what's happening. But this is the tip of the iceberg. What comes is even more complicated, and that's the long-term adaptation that we need to plan for. So we need to have enabling environments that prepare and enable us to have the tools and the capacity to address the long-term impacts. So let me just make 5 quick points. One is that you need very strong institutions, and this is particularly the ministries of planning and finance that have the political and the clout within government to really lead strong intersectoral collaboration and cooperation, to really embed adaptation considerations in national budgets, and exactly what was just said about national development strategies. Public expenditure reviews are really good so that you can understand what you're already doing, that it's not something brand new you have to start from scratch. A lot is doing that you can build upon, and to really have a better sense of how you can prioritize. Because when you look at the impacts and what very poor countries or communities, or even a country like my own, Colombia, where it's wave after wave of droughts or floods, and it's never ending, how do you prioritize? So you need strong institutions to have that capacity to prioritize. So that's one. The second one has to do with the capacity building. And I would complement what's been said, that it's not just the public, but also the private sector. It needs to have a better understanding of how to generate and how to assess the data, how to understand what the scenarios are, how to analyze them, and how to monitor these long-term trends. We also need better capacity for that so we can understand the costs of inaction, because the costs of inaction are something that are not fully comprehended by many still, although clearly in this audience everybody understands, but we need a lot more advocacy and capacity building.
And of course those are very compelling to finance ministers.
Absolutely. And we really need to have this, we were talking about the need for a participatory process. Many countries are creating platforms where you really bring private and public sector together, but also across ministries and across the national and the local level. How to bring in the local level, I think, would be a third very important element. The fourth is data. You need really robust systems to support decision-making. It should be user-driven to really respond to the actual needs and demands of users at different levels. And you need to generate capacity for that and the resources for that, because it's expensive, it's complicated, and that's where the cooperation comes in. Leadership such as the Netherlands or the EU is fundamental in driving that. And that has to do also with translating all of that science and that data for policymakers. Unless you translate it, you're not going to get through to those who have to take decisions.
Yes, can I just say, all of you scientists, 1 page of A4 is enough. For
Exactly.
a policymaker. I am serious, because
Yeah.
the climate change science is very, very complex.
That's why I'm raising it, because I think that is part of the enabling environment. And the last I would say, which is linked to that obviously, is research centers. We need research centers such as those that you were alluding to that have been created, that are really building, it's learning by doing. We're trying to figure out, all of us, how to do this. We need a lot of room for innovation from private sector and from local authorities, from local actors. We need to really see how we can create momentum around learning better what's working and not working. And finally, we need champions. We need champions like Queen Maxima, but we also need local champions and champions in the private sector. And this array of forces and of tools should be able to create a momentum for that enabling environment for short and long-term adaptation responses.
Robert, I saw you scribbling furiously there. That was a very comprehensive, and thank you for that. Just a quick comment from you.
So what I was scribbling was that I was agreeing with what you were saying. I think, we have this Sendai framework, an international agreement signed by all member states of the United Nations that identifies 5 targets to reduce disaster risk, loss of life, economic damage, and so on. And climate change is actually a fundamental driver of risk. The point I wanted to make, though, was that a number of people have said we have to get the Environment Ministry together with the Finance Ministry. We would say we have to get the Disaster Response Ministry together with the Finance Ministry. The point I wanted to make is about silos and the enabling environment. Because risk, first of all, climate change, of course, isn't an environment crisis. It's a health crisis with Zika virus, or possibly if there are links to Ebola. It's an economic development crisis if people don't travel to the country because they're worried about a disease outbreak. And so one of the innovations of Sendai is that it brings multi-hazard, it breaks down the silos, it brings multi-hazard risk together, and it creates an opportunity for that discussion. And I think the central budget is really key because that's where choices are made about the budget. So how does that happen? And this will be very quick. First.
Yes, quick.
Quick. You need data on what disasters are currently costing in a country. Without that, you can't have a discussion with the finance ministry. Secondly, you need a risk profile for the future, because without knowing how the risks are changing with climate change, you can't come up with an accurate figure. Then you have money, a figure, then you can have a discussion with the finance ministry and engage that and embed it in fundamental budget processes. And this is really important to break down the silos and to make sure that that is sustainable. It's to have a regulatory environment, laws that have been passed by the parliament, for example, that say you must incorporate climate risk in your planning, because then the short-termism of governments and leaders doesn't undermine the effort to achieve this outcome.
Yeah, and I think, and I hope people will nod when I say this, that the Dutch have already leading by example in this, in breaking down the silos in your government and having a lot of ministries working together on climate change. I'm looking at the Dutch, hoping they'll nod. Yes. The answer is yes. A final word, a brief word from you, Naoko.
Yeah, I cannot agree more on the last 2 speakers, because I was with Ministry of Finance for 30 years. And
yes.
In order for me to take action on this important agenda, I need to be convinced, but not in the very, very long brief, but maybe 1 page, and with a lot of
So you've got it
data.
there direct from a finance minister.
And with a lot of good data, the research and information, so that we can calculate that this, investment is actually, it's much better than longer term in the longer term. So that is very, very important. So breaking silo, and right now I'm dealing with mostly the Ministry of Environment. I still see the huge, huge gap between the Environmental Ministry circle and Finance Ministry circle. These really need to be broken. And also, how to get the private sector in, that then if we have, say, the water account, that would be much easier for me to take up some water project in the budget line. That is right now, it's quite missing. So that's something we need to know.
Okay, so thank you for giving me the perfect segue into the next area that I want to tackle, which is about the private sector, how we can engage them in adaptation. And of course, I'm looking at you, Wim, because you have this unique double hat of being both a Delta Commissioner and in your banking capacity. How do we engage them?
Well, first of all, I'm not from the party that wants to break down silos, because I really believe that every interest, every organization has to be challenged to contribute to a higher goal, to a higher objective. And that is, I think, the secret of our Dutch Delta approach. That water boards, provinces, Rijkswaterstaat, central agency, ministries, municipalities are part of the community working to the goals of adaptation. We said it's a political choice. That's my first reaction on that. The second is that you always need an awareness of an urgency. In the Netherlands, it's kind of existential that we do this. And we find out a lot of things. And we want to share that with other countries and other communities. So the Delta Coalition, started yesterday, is one of these examples. 12 countries, 4 continents, trying to help each other. We really need to help each other, because this is huge, and it takes decades. Well, then the private sector. Actually, the same approach, in my opinion. We try in the Netherlands to make bankable projects, to make projects with also an objective for businesses to invest. For instance, a dike also being an energy plant, or a project with room for the river also being a recreational asset, or a parking lot in a dike. So maybe you can find solutions smarter than just one objective. I really believe that what Queen Maxima said, that we have to bring in the insurance companies, the insurance sector. It is also in their interest. So I'm looking for interest. And that maybe, that way of thinking, as I also do in governmental spheres, maybe helps to come further. Everybody understands that you have to do something. What's in it for them?
Yes.
That's my
I warn
main
you, Canadian insurers, where are you, Canadian insurers?
They are not, you see.
No, we have 3 Canadian insurers with us, and I'm very, very keen to come to them if they're still here, because I think the insurance industry is a key player that we've got to involve. But what is the business model? How do we engage with the right business models?
Yeah. As I said before, I'm sitting here, remain till the end of the conference with mixed feelings. So
Let's
don't
take
worry,
away.
don't
We're going
worry.
to take away your conflict.
I will overcome that.
This is a kind of absolution here.
But the
we lift your
involvement, we need
conflicts.
the involvement of the private sector, etc. It triggers something like, we need your involvement to step up and to make a business model of the misery of others. And I know. I know, it's not what we want, but it creates that feeling, and therefore I stress again the mitigation. Okay, the business sector has solutions, has technologies, has innovative power to address that. And I'm very glad with, he's partly my boss in the Dutch Central Bank, because we're both in the Supervisory Board, but he's chairman. So I agree, and I admire what he's doing in the Netherlands on the dikes, etc. But the problem is not in the Netherlands. The problem is not in Western Europe. The countries which will suffer first from not addressing, not mitigating climate change are the south of Bangladesh, 50 million people. They cannot live there anymore, already today. Horn of Africa, 120 million people. Basically, they cannot live there already today. And you cannot say that they caused that. Well, if those people start to migrate, we cannot deal already with 60 million refugees today out of war zones. If we get later on hundreds of millions of refugees out of migration, we need to address that those people can live in those areas. So we need a business model then, we need our technologies to be implemented there. And there I have some hope of the Paris Treaty of the 100 billion a year of the richer countries to the poorer countries to mitigate and to address, and maybe also to adapt. Because the financial models, of course, to find those solutions in the south of Bangladesh and in the Horn of Africa are lacking to find the financial resources to address those things. Now, can we do something? Yes. What are we doing? For example, Ethiopia, those kind of countries will be confronted with more droughts. If they continue to deal with their land as they did before, it will degrade faster. So what we're trying to teach them is treat your land in a different way, but it will have in the beginning years, due to climate change, it will have a lesser yield. The people are resisting tremendously because find that in 4 or 5 years it has a higher yield, but how do I overcome the coming 4 years? And together with the UN, the World Food Programme, we said, we provide you the difference of the food shortage which we create by asking you to treat your land in a different way. In the first 4 years, we provide you the difference, and then you can treat it in the right way with a higher yield later on. Those technologies are there, and those solutions are there. And it is important, because all people we create stunting with, all stunted children, are lost forever. You cannot repair stunting later on by providing the micronutrients at a later moment in your life. If you are 10 or 12 or 25 and you lack micronutrients for half a year, you can repair. If you are 0 or just born, you cannot repair if you mistreat people for half a year. So therefore we find those models important, but I come back, what is lacking a little bit in all of this, if you want to involve the private sector, is the business model in the countries who are the most vulnerable. Not in the Netherlands, not in Germany, not in the UK. We will find the business model. But we need to find the business models there, and that involves financials.
And it speaks to co-production, really finding
Absolutely
out what's important
No, that's
to people.
what we do. We just set up now a big factory in Rwanda with 25,000 smallholders, providing the raw materials, providing the agriculture input to make nutritious food, which we partly provide to the government of Rwanda, partly to the World Food Programme, and partly sell ourselves to people who can afford that directly. And those kind of cooperative models, those models can work, and we are involving ourselves in that. But it is a couple of examples, but I remain with my previous points as well.
Laurent, a quick thought from you, and then I'm going to come to the audience because you are now breaking Twitter with all these questions.
Yeah, just a quick reaction about the role of the private sector. I think Queen Maxima has given again the direction. She said something which is very strong to me. No one should be left behind. So then, if we say that the role of private sector is essential, how do we achieve this? Because the private sector is also about making profit. So if in mitigation, I think once we find a solution for a new technology, for instance, it's, let's say quite straightforward to convince a company to start doing the processing it industrially, and there is no problem. But what about adaptation? You said in Ethiopia, in Western Africa, we need more soil rehabilitation and so on. What kind of new technologies can we find and process it at industrial level that we can bring to the farmers so that it will have really an impact? Not the small things that we are doing here in a small village. People, they are taking the stones on their head and they put it to just to slow down the water stream and so on. No, we need new technologies in the adaptation side that will be, of course, of interest of local people, but enough interesting for business sector to get in. That is why, again, I think we were talking about the enabling environment. One key actor is left aside, science, researchers. We need to involve them because you are talking about building new business models. There, we need then science to go there to talk with the farmers to understand what are their problems, to see how they can now streamline all these new ideas and bring it into a new technological and feasible and tangible tools that people can use. The last thing I want to say is that in this environment, we need also to see that also climate change is a new opportunity for business. When I take rural Africa, for instance, for energy, if we had to rely only on the grid, it will take, I don't know, maybe 1 century again to bring in the model of Europe, getting the electricity from the grid to any single remote village. But today we know that with solar panels, it's easy. So this is now a new niche in which the private sector, the business people, should get into and try to really expand it, because it's really a new opportunity for the farmers to get light, to get energy right in their houses. And it's interest for the farmers, for local population. It's interest also for the private sector. This is how I think we need to combine things.
And I think one of the most important things, speaking with my science hat on, is to bring those outstanding generation from African countries, to bring them to centres of excellence on scholarships, so that they can take then the technologies back to their home countries and really be the implementers of change.
And this is also the objective of WASCAL and SASCAL in Southern Africa, that we now, with the model that we have set up between Germany and the countries in Africa, West Africa and Southern Africa, is that we built this climate centers in the region. We educate the young generation in the region, of course in partnership with the Western scientists, and they address the problems of the region, bringing science where it is needed.
Very good. Okay, so with a nod to Queen Maxima, the first question we're going to take from these Twitter questions is from David Dodman. What role for cash transfers in enabling urban poor and refugees in building their own resilience? Who wants to take that? Paula, I'm looking at you.
All right. Cash transfers can definitely be a very important additional revenue stream for helping people to adapt. But it has to be, it can't be a standalone measure. It has to be embedded in a broader policy context, and it has to be embedded in a broader capacity building context. Just a cash transfer will not really address the longer term resilient needs of the poor, whether in an urban or a rural setting. And it's the same thing for insurance schemes or for other mechanisms or other tools that we're looking at. You need to embed this in a broader, more systemic response of capacity building, of institutions, of policy frameworks that will enable those revenue streams to really be catalytic.
Have we got any of those insurers here? Have they run away back to Canada? They have. They've deserted us now back to their fires. Anybody wants to add something about insurance? Because I do think it's a critical area that we haven't really tackled perhaps as much as we should. Whether either of you two would like to comment on insurance. Wim?
Well, it depends on the situation, as always. But here in the Netherlands, we find out and just made the analysis that the protection we give our people by dunes, dikes, barriers, etc., is a kind of merit good. So it's actually cheaper that the government is paying this than doing it by insurance. But nevertheless, more on the urban adaptation or regional projects, there must be a possibility for insurance companies to have an interest in helping to build up more resilience for them. So,
for instance, you only get flood insurance if you take measures
and then,
to protect your home.
Together with Feike, the Central Bank of the Netherlands is supervising the insurance sector, so we really will bring this into that discussion.
Because Feike, it will be a disaster if we all become uninsurable.
Well, exactly, because before we get that insurance companies will say, well, you need to take some precautions. Look already what happened in 2015, especially of the European insurance companies with big interest in the UK. The UK had much more flooding in 2015 than ever before, and it costed many insurance companies a fortune, and they did not calculate for that. So many insurance companies, and I was recently in a session with insurance companies, say, I need to increase your annual fee, your premium to us, because I cannot use any models anymore of the past to base my risk for the future. So what I will do in order to protect my own business, I will just anticipate increased payments and increased floodings, etc. I don't know exactly based on what, not on history, and therefore increase premiums.
Which become
otherwise you run into
unaffordable.
problems.
Yes.
And then the people who are insured say, so I need to pay of something which did not happen, you did not even calculate, you already asked me to pay upfront much more of something you anticipate is happening due to the fact that we don't mitigate well enough. And the insurance companies say, yeah, basically that's true. Even stronger, certain of your parts we're not going to insure anymore because we don't know what to do with it. So those kind of risks are there. The interesting thing, there's always an opportunity there, that you see that now all parts of the financial sector start moving with this climate change. The insurance company, but look also to the pension funds who find it risky to be invested so heavily in fossil resources. You see that the whole financial sector is starting to move and to reposition itself due to this climate change situation. And that in itself can create also opportunities for releasing and redirecting funds in the right purposes like we are discussing here. And that is not easy to do that, but I think there are great opportunities there for as well.
And is there any way that we can accelerate that?
Sorry,
Paula.
just come in and add there, because we're talking, you're mentioning the UK and Europe. Insurance schemes for very poor and marginalized communities are a very different ballgame.
Yes.
And there's very the premiums can be very expensive. It can be very difficult for them to access that. There's been mixed results in many cases with whether indexed insurance. So you also need not only, as both of us are saying, to create a broader enabling environment to increase overall climate resilience, but you also need to look at sort of pooling mechanisms or ways of aggregating and how you can support, and I think it's some of the issues that Queen Maxima was addressing, so that you can really ensure that these kinds of tools are available to the poorest. We have to go an extra mile to make that available.
Naoko, what's your thoughts on that? How do you make those products available?
This least insurance. No, that's exactly the all important point are actually the already table, that in order to ensure to provide service to the most vulnerable or the poorest one, we really need this another technique of the aggregation, how to pull it. But one good news is that I was very encouraged to see that now the G7 steps into this area to create that risk insurance facility, which I have quite a good the hope that how that now the finance minister circle actually trying to deal with it. Another good example was that now the finance ministers are actually launching the V20, Vulnerable 20 Countries Initiative. It's now going to the 43 countries. It's a very good sign that the finance minister circle also to address this issue very, very frontally.
Robert?
Maybe just one point. There actually is a quite exciting initiative underway currently involving the largest insurance agencies around the world. There was a meeting, the time blurs a bit, I think it was a week and a half ago in Washington. The Secretary-General of the UN hosted a meeting, and there's some very exciting work underway and a commitment, first of all, around both the reinsurers, the insurance industry, and the mutuals to focus on products, sort of the micro-insurance products. Secondly, to look at the regulatory environment that's creating constraints to reach people who are currently underinsured, with all the risks of whether the public sector is doing something that the private sector would ordinarily do itself, but that's another issue. And thirdly, looking at sharing risk information, because part of the problem in many countries, particularly less developed countries, is just an absence of data on what the risks are. This is, again, a link to the Sendai framework. But insurance industries, different insurance bodies have pieces of the data. And at this meeting, there's an initiative underway to pool that data to make that open and available as a way of trying to unlock some of the constraints.
Okay. I want to take one more question from you about financial inclusion, if I can, before anybody got a question in that area? Princess.
Oh, thank you. I'm from Burkina Faso, Your Highness. I'm very happy to hear that you're talking about inclusive finance, because I'm working with the informal sector to structure them. We can talk about not leaving nobody behind and leave more than 1 billion of people who are working, who are on the surviving mode. And the farmers, our small farmers, they are the first investors ever. As a study from FAO saying that they're investing 3-4 times more than governments and big companies. But what are we doing for them? That's why I'm launching this afternoon at 5:30 the expertise hub of the informal sector. So of course you're invited, Your Highness, if you can, to strengthen us. And I would like to have a link after with you, because I'm part of the Private Sector Advisory Board of UNICEF with Robert. We're advocating together. And of course, we have to lead by example. That's really key. And thanks for what you're doing.
And how do we directly resource those small and medium enterprises, those farmers, individual
very
farmers?
simple. You know, we in the least developing countries, we're not on the standby mode. We're organizing ourselves. You already have initiatives on the way. For instance, in the finance, Her Highness probably know about what we call in West Africa the tontine. The women together,
They're
put
very
money.
scary African women, extraordinarily powerful.
Don't be scared to be scary with the high heels that you love so much. So they put the money together and replacing the banks, the insurance, it's mutual accountability. And you can't come into the group if you don't have the trust. It's about trust. Also, we need to build trust. Trust is key. When people are trusting each other, then there is no scaring. In business is the case as well. If you don't trust your partners, you don't go. And insurance is to cover, because the fact is to cover the untrusted people. That's the case, right?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I think that examples are there, and financial tools need to be adapted. We need small grants from Jeff, for instance, and in the developing programs, you need to really involve to adapt the financial tools, because the problem is there. Please listen to us. Our parents send us to school. I'm an engineer in electricity, but they send us to school. We're able to do the things. Please give us our little place.
Thank you. And I promise I didn't engineer that, but that is a perfect place to end our session.